Well, that took so long, I guess we're out of time. Well, since we started taping these, just constantly, more and more people come up to me on the street and they say, Congressman Bob, they say, why is it? I mean, they're asking me personally now that having this short brush with fame, and they say, Congressman Bob, why is it that I notice in my weekly pay that they take out Social Security when they know that I am just abjectly insecure and just totally unsociable? Business time. Reading from my own works. With a survey. We'll see. Man's first nuclear device was the speech bomb, which blasted him out of the silent survival age into the post-noisy one. Since man began to think and speak and thus became civilized, he's gone through two stages of speech, survival and post-survival, which in some fashion is always mystical. While survival speech is plain and literal, post-survival tends to be metaphorical. To think afresh, then, is to think so plainly about metaphors, is to think as plainly about metaphors as others do about the literal. Well, as you can see, I was about to divide up things again, although the mind working in a binary nature already does the division. It's not that I show up and say, hey, I got a great new division. The world's divided into people who think in black and white and those who think in stereo. The mind has already done it, is why people are such sitting ducks, such anxious consumers for any sort of book, religion, anything that says something that has a nice name or that's got a subtitle, that's anything about why man tries to do good and does evil. Everyone's a sitting duck for that. You just don't notice, but it is one of the primary hooks on the literary fishing line in civilization. So it's not me in any means, or it's not you getting so hip that you are acutely attuned. I'm Lysdexia again. Lysdexic. That you're acutely attuned to hearing it. You're primed to hear it. You're wired up to hear anything that says things are either this or that. The voice told Ken and Barbie, all right, you're either Ken or Barbie. That got them going. And it says you can either stay here or go. And the voice began to breathe, fire and brimstone, whatever it did. And it's always been easy for people to realize, all right, we've got two choices. Which, of course, requires no thought, since you are wired up in the neural system to hear it, to be prepared for it, at any rate. I am doing it again, but that's one reason I was pointing out. It's another explanation. There has been two stages of talk, and they are not now mutually exclusive, but it has been, as you can see, in one lifetime, or in the lifetime of man, and concurrently, it is like two stages. One is survival speech. Survival speech, if we want to play the good old caveman scenarios back through again, is man first began to talk. Just imagine what would have to have been the first things he said. Besides all the jokes that Barbie said, what in the hell is that thing? After the cave people got past that, the first thing that they had to talk about, the first thing that you would talk about when you were a kid yourself, is survival. That you can imagine past the point, let's be a little more sophisticated than just a kid hollering, food, food, which is not non-exemplary of what I'm speaking of. But if soon caveman, they begin to talk and they figure, what we talk about. They didn't have to think about it. What would be the first things that they would talk about? It would be matters of survival. This is not the case, but if you want to look at it from another kind of fairly pedestrian view, you could even say, which is not exemplary, is not explanatory of anything, but you could say that that was why men did talk. that once they had the ability to talk, and they thought, well, why should we talk? Is one of the things to talk about was strictly survival, that if they could talk, one guy could look at another guy and say, I've been noticing you have had nonstop for the last 2 weeks, you just seem to have a limitless supply of rutabagas. Where'd you get them? Come on, I'm your brother-in-law or something. And so the guy can tell him. He can talk. He says, all right, I wasn't going to tell anybody, but you know where that big rotted tree is when you go, when you fall down the trail like you do every morning? When you roll past that big boulder on your left, 2 rotted trees over there, you'll find them. It had to be, figuratively speaking, it had to be matters of survival. And I repeat, you can see it in children now, although it's pretty short-lived, or you can just see it. As soon as you talk, what would be the first thing you ever talked about? Which way the restroom? How do I get water? How much is rent around here? It would be survival, plain and simple. After that, it would be post-survival talk. That is what civilization is based upon. And what I was going to throw in somewhat, I'll assume surprisingly, is that once you get past survival talk, and it can then become a matter of degree how much you see, because even today, when I say they're concurrent, eating is a matter of survival, absolutely. And so you can say, well, any talk that had to do with eating is survival talk. Yeah, except for this. You turn to somebody, instead of just saying, whoever you live with, your husband or wife or a friend, you say, instead of just, I'm hungry, food, where, you say, what do you say we go out tonight to that new Italian restaurant? You mean that real expensive one? Yeah, but hell, you got a raise. They quit taking out your Social Security once they realized what a red ass you were. You understand? In other words, people can now discuss survival, but they discuss it on a sophisticated, civilized level. It's no longer tied to survival. They're not just talking about where can I get food. They're talking about where can I get a good northern Italian meal. But beyond that, the overlapping, the further you get away from anything that would seem to be survival, the very things that would seem to be absolutely indicative of a civilized, sophisticated mind, you're talking about post-survival speech. And you are then, in some form, though it's not seen that way, you're in some form then referring to mystical speech. And I guess I could say I use mystical advisedly, except I don't know what advisedly means. In other words, I could have called it something else, I guess, religious, metaphysical, transcendental, spooky, weird, new age, but mystical used to cover it. That you are speaking of matters that would seem, by any account, and you do not have to be religious, you do not have to be mystically inclined, but the matters that are non-survival are tending to that which would transcend anything physical. That's why I separate it and say that you can see speech as being either survival or post-survival, non-survival. That we're past the point now that you do not really have to talk literally if we're going to divide it up into really discrete, absolutely separate compartments. You no longer have to talk about survival per se. It's past that point. Nowadays you could lay down on the street in this our day and time and actually probably survive without talking much. I mean, if you just laid there and looked hungry and homeless, you ain't got in a fairly decent neighborhood. Somebody will come by and feed you. Somebody will come by and do the talking for you. They say, are you hungry? Are you about passed out? And well, have you eaten lately? Would you like something to eat? That is what I mean. It's almost impossible to even be alive in our day and time and have to talk specifically about survival. Past that, a man can be an atheist, he can be a humanist, he can be non-religious, he can laugh at the idea of flying saucers. Of course, if he moves to Mississippi, he'll pay for it. Maybe. He can laugh at all things metaphysical, all things religious, all things occult, new age, whatever the latest term is. You know what I mean. Absolutely deny. No, I have no interest in such as that, other than I might denounce it because it's a throwback, it's an obstacle to civilization, etc. It's not true. Well, not that statement's not true, but it's not true that anybody can speak nowadays past the survival stage and not be speaking mystically. You've got no choice. Think about it. Now, we have described it from all sorts of different directions, and without being aggressive or condemnable about it, I assume by now that all of you can see that in one quite real sense, civilization, what we call civilization, in all of its forms, anything beyond the survival level, the arts, politics, just anything that you could, just theoretically for a second, say, well, that we could do without that and actually survive if we had to, as creatures on this planet. So anything at that level, civilized, post-survival, non-survival, in a quite real sense, is non-existent. That's why I've in the past defined civilization as being able to make more and more out of less and less, and less out of more and more, and any combination thereof. That is what it is. That's what criticism is. As many times as I'm sure some people thought I was attacking criticism, criticism is part of the growth of, well, let's say, the arts. But then you can say, well, criticism is just a non-existent. If we got past of saying, well, that's spurious, it's just non-existent. It's just blabber. It's just palaver in the wind. Well, sure it is, but look what they're criticizing. Oh, yeah, they're criticizing art. I mean, well, like good music. You know, like Cypress Hill or House of Pain or the Soup Dragons. All right, Lawrence Welk and Frank Sinatra for you old shits. The Rolling Stones, that's right. We don't have anybody that old enough to. At any rate, as much as everybody can enjoy music, you don't think music exists, do you? You don't think art exists, politics exists, religion exists. That's one reason the institutions have to build such great structures and take on such a formidable outer shell, is because everyone knows that inside there's nothing there. You can't go to Harvard or the church and knock on the door and say, who's there? Somebody has to run out and say, oh, we're here, to cover up for the fact that there's nothing in there. That's civilization, but that's the way it is. Once you see that, and once you see it in a non-judgmental way, that you just simply see that in one real sense, compared to survival, compared to food, compared to sex, shelter, civilization truly can be defined without it being attacked as being the non-existent. It is now to the point, it is the mandatory non-existent, because you could not live in this time and place without being civilized. You can't. You would not behave correctly. You would have already been either dead, in jail, put in some kind of confinement by the institutions, by the government. Because you have to operate on the basis that when it's down to a survival level, for instance, you turn around and you're hungry just suddenly, you're walking down the street and you're hungry, you walk by the fruit stand and grab something, or somebody's walking by with something to eat, what the hell, take it. You might have the money to pay for it, but hell, save a few minutes. You don't have to go stand in line at the walk-in window at McDonald's, just take it. But you don't if you're civilized. Why? And then you could try and describe it. You know what you describe, though, don't you? As invisible restraints. You just say, well, it's not the thing to do. What do you mean it's not the thing to do? Well, then I guess if you really thought you were some sort of, what do they call them, city intellectuals, you might say, well, I'm just too civilized, plus, if you want to get down and dirty about it, plus, if I did that, the guy might call the police and I would have, if not a row, I could be arrested. So I'm just not going to do it. Well, all of you people, you surely know by now, the more civilized you are, it is not the actual physical fear of reprisal. That's not what keeps people from killing each other and stealing. That's not what keeps you from doing it. Because if you had any sense at all, which is sort of an old joke among criminals, that if you knew what you were doing, you wouldn't be caught. That's sort of the joke amongst real professional criminals, so I hear. Is, the people that become famous, the Willie Suttons and the John Dillingers, and as they laugh, they think, how in the world does somebody that failed become famous? Because famous criminals, you never heard of them. Why? Because they don't get caught. They don't get their picture in the paper. You never heard of them. If there is a few conspiracy buffs, we're back to the stupid conspiracy. For all these great criminals, whoever you thought it was, from Frank Costello to Al Capone to Attila the Hun, there was somebody behind them that was actually collecting all the money. It was the Brains' outfit, and they finally decided we need some sort of sacrificial goat, and they took, you know, a Capone or somebody with other serious mental problems and went and kicked him out the door. Those of you that like to expand your institutional view, you could take it from the world of crime into the world of, say, politics or religion, assuming that you see a movement possible there. What I started to point out is, it is not, you'll find people in the street, you'd find the people, they would be on the sliding scale, the less civilized, or as I sometimes refer to it right now, of mind, the more simplistic, that would say, well, I might be a criminal. Some guy might have a few beers in a bar and say, you got to talk about crime or something, and crime rate going up and down and this and that, and you tried to talk philosophically about the nature of civilization, and you caught him in a weak moment, and he might admit, well, you're right. I guess all of us probably crooks. I got thirsty and wanted a beer. I might go down to 7-Eleven instead of trying to borrow money from my brother-in-law or write a post-dated check. I'd just go down there with a gun or my finger in my pocket, and they'd say, are you glad to sit? No, not that. And I'd say, hey, I'm taking all the beer. And you could say, well, why don't you do it? And I go, well, shit, the chances are they're going to catch me. I was reading in the paper that the 7-Eleven, those kind of convenience stores hold up. It said that the figures right here in Alabama, that 84% of them are caught. Of course, they don't point out the 84% of them that steal beer from 7-Eleven stores in Alabama go outside and sit down and drink it. They sit there on the curb and open up one. There was a point to this, believe it or not. I mean, to this one sidestep. What I want you to see is, without any doubt, the more civilized you are, and we'll assume that you guys are past the point that you would say, well, if I insisted, what's the only reason that you do not steal anytime you need money? That you would not say, well, I'm afraid that they'll catch me. And I don't mean that you'd be lying, because the more civilized you are, it is not the fear of physical reprisal or retribution from the law itself. That's not it. Now, of course, a man civilized, he knows that there are laws against felony murders, against, burglary, against theft by taking. He knows all. He knows that the judicial system's there. But the more civilized you are, the less bearing that has on it. You're held by invisible restraints. You're held by civilization. You're held by something that doesn't exist. And if you're sophisticated at all and just complex in the general sense, which we'll assume all of you are, it is not the fear of you sitting in jail that keeps you from committing acts in the general scheme as reported in the paper of being crime. That's not it. You do it for other reasons. No matter how you try to describe it, it would be for invisible reasons. Non-existent reasons. You're held by invisible shackles. You're guided. The herd, neurally, of man is run by like invisible wranglers. That's what keeps it going. Now back to what I was saying. Survival talk and post-survival. The post-survival, the non-survival, the trans-survival, what we're talking about now, civilized in every aspect, with not even a modicum, not even a hint of any sort of prejudice against it. But anything that you talk about that we'll assume now is almost as much as possible removed from matters of survival. That you're talking about art, politics, science even, which some of you might think is a little trickier, but it's not. Would be trickier for me to run through the Hormel grinder. Anything you talk about that is not directly in the matter to do with survival is then mystical. And I'm not trying to play with words, but it is mystical. And the more sophisticated and civilized you were, if you were just an ordinary person, and I was talking like this and got into a conversation, I could even get you to go, yeah. Somebody could say that their main hobby in life that they like to discuss is the opera. And they can talk about the music and the drama and the great combination. Nothing equals the nexus between actual action, music, and the book and the stories and the whole ambiance of being in nice halls. And you say, yeah. And yet if I said something like, I like opera too, get them going in a positive way, and you say, that whole kind of experience is down there, I hate to say, it's down there mystical. Now you stand in the lobby, let's say of the Met, and you're having a glass of break champagne, and you get people to go, yeah, that's all right. But you get them to about the symphony. If they like the symphony, you get them to about art, painting, sculpture, easily religion. You can even get non-religious people, or people who were religious and feel as though they've drifted away or got too smart for it. You can say, well, or even people of a different religion. You can say, you ever been to a Catholic church, to non-Catholic, and you go, yeah, or Greek Orthodox, and you say, I don't know anything about it, but did you ever actually walk in to see a mass? And they go, yeah. Say, that's almost, I'm not religious myself, especially not Catholic, but that's almost, and I don't mean this the way they do, but it's almost a mystical, even though you're not religious. And people go, yeah, that's true. Even a good atheist. You can get people to do about sports. Not them playing, but the discussion. The civilized aspect of sports, which sports are an example of civilization. If you want that, because if it was not civilized, it would actually be people out there killing each other. It'd be warfare. It'd be hunting. What it is now is a form of civilization. Here was what I was trying to get at for the time being, is once you get past survival talk, the speech of survival, which all of you are, just more or less, the times you're talking about absolute survival are just minuscule, and even then they're colored, as I said, because about the closest you could get is, turning around to the man in produce at the A&P and saying, you don't have any cucumbers? I'm about to die. Or oranges? If I don't get some vitamin C, I will literally die. I'm getting scurvy. The only case on record here in Indiana in years. You can go over there and get canned grapefruit and oranges. The point is, there's almost no occasion, it's almost impossible, that you would be talking about absolute survival. I was trying to think of any exception. I always try to play the other side for you. The guy suddenly walking down an alleyway at 3 o'clock and a gun and says, your money or your life? And you go, my money. Maybe that's survival speech. I don't know. Surely you get the point. That to varying degrees, but almost to the exclusion of the first case of survival, but to varying degrees after that, nowadays, civilized talk, what you're engaged in, what the whole world is engaged in, is non-survival talk. It is discussions, debates, observations, explanations, palaver about civilization and all of its many forms and institutions, from religion to sports and politics, etc. But compared to survival, when you speak of civilization, you're speaking of the mystical, because it is non-physical, it is non-basic, it is as far as survival, it is non-required. So you're talking about the mystical. If you see that in a certain way, I may not stay with that, but if you see that in a certain way, it will also give you another whole personal explanation, if you see it in your own way, between the apparent continuing arguments between the so-called religious, the non-religious, between the scientifically bent and the poetically inclined. You can see it in you. It's been another one of the old divisions that man's divided up into some sort of cruder physical nature and then into a would-be more spiritual being. It is him attempting to speak about two different worlds, and they are about, the description I was giving, are about as discrete as is possible, since all survival always has something to do with the material world. Not that it's better or worse, but it has to do with sex, food, your own physical functions. Whereas a person could be civilized, a person can be artistic strictly in their imagination. You can write symphonies, you can write poems, you can paint in your head. You can do it and never touch clay, manuscript paper, a typewriter, an instrument. You can run the world. You can straighten out the politics. You can straighten out the EC. You can rewrite the Maastricht Treaty, plus give it a better name, in your head. And nobody ever know it. It becomes mystical, and it gets into something else that we might as well push toward You can tell their place. Let me get my ducks in their proper. You can tell that a place is truly civilized when metaphors and allegories are taken as superior to plain talk. Somewhere in here I've got a group that either tonight or sometime having to do with plain talk, as I was calling it. And there's a process as this goes through. Well, let me go back to what I was reading. I touched on it once here, that survival and post-survival talk, speech, and survival speech is always plain and literal, which would be what we're trying to describe in the fictional scenario of you being a child again, or being a caveman again. And what you would say if you were back to the survival and what you wanted was water. That you had stumbled away from your cave and where you hang around, you got lost, and suddenly you run across something resembling a Homo talkius sapien, and you were, water, water. That you were about to die from dehydration. If you are sane enough to actually want to survive, you would not go up and say, "Hi, stranger. Could I tell you a fable?" And begin to weave some sort of allegory about helping one's neighbor. And you get through and find maybe a man says, "Well, there's something you want." You'd holler, "Water, water." Plain and direct. Plain and literal. If it has to do with survival, a kid, well, you see it surely. If it actually came to survival right now, that you were dying, you fell down and you've gone in some sort of coma, and people came by, or they called the medical, and you tried to get one word, diabetes, or whatever it was. It would be plain and direct. You wouldn't start saying, I seem to have, I know in this day and age, even though it's the 21st century, I know some people are still upset by neural maladies that make people act a little strange, but now you're laying about to die. You wouldn't go through that. You just put, tag, look on my tag, find what's wrong with me. It'd be plain and literal. Post-survival, the way I put it here, being somewhat poetic evidently myself at that time, post-survival tends to be metaphorical. Tends to be metaphorical. Well, you've already, on a wider level, you might say, I was pointing out that it is mystical, but tends to be metaphorical. And if you think about it a second, and you were following my previous description, then tends to be metaphorical is poetic charity. If you're talking about that which doesn't exist, it's got to be metaphorical. How else are you going to talk about it? It's not an attack. How else are you going to talk about God, religion, the institutions themselves, education? The hope for humanity today stands squarely on the shoulders of education. And any educated, civilized man will go, yes. Where's this animal stand on? Where is education? And if they were taking you seriously at all, they go, well, don't be silly, my good man. When I say education, it's a concept. So you don't mean to actually go down to the University of Mississippi and try to climb up on top of the building and it'll make me, oh, don't be silly. When I say stand on the shoulders of education, it's a concept. It's, if you will, a metaphor. But if you don't want that for a minute, how about a concept? What is less physical, what is less real than a concept? Just a metaphor sounds better. Is everything still rolling?
Yep.
Oh. The beauty of the situation, in a sense, is, or one of the beauties, is that metaphors, the way that people talk, the more sophisticated, the more educated they are at the ordinary level. The more they can speak poetically, the more they can speak allegorically, metaphorically, and they are taken to be at least a bit above the ordinary cut of civilized post-survival people. As though, well, a man who can speak an allegory, a man who can just almost on the spur of the moment, just take whatever is said and turn it into some sort of halfway flyable metaphorical observation. I understand that. But the truth is, everything that's said that's non-survival tends to the metaphorical. And the reason that metaphors, the reason that symbolism, the reason that poetic descriptions of all nature, religious, scientific, natural, romantic, the reason that they, I suggest to you, are so striking is the fact that you got no choice. That's why they're impressive. All right, those of you who got that, then you understand the folly of attacking, for instance, religion. Since on the wide mechanical, automatic level, the more intellectually active man gets, in a sense, the more what we call religious, the more it falls into the domain of being subject to attack by the civilized and dismissed. But that's to say, well, why don't people just... Religion, mysticism, conflicts with science. It conflicts with just common sense. Yeah, from that view. But then, of course, the religious people say just the same thing about the others. The point is, religion is just a great example, a prime example of mysticism, of metaphorical speech and description. And what is striking, one reason it survived as long is because, back to what I was saying, all talk that is non-survival is, to some degree, metaphorical to start with. You're talking about the invisible. You're talking about the non-existent, comparably speaking. So therefore, if you're going to describe that which does not exist, you got to lay into it. What if religion? What if philosophy? What if education? What if morality? All of them being non-existent. Post-survival concepts. Aspects of post-survival, non-survival speech. They do not exist. And yet, of course, we all see how much they exist. Your life is almost controlled by that handful of things I just mentioned, from one view. That, hey, they got me tied up. But what if, playing this kind of game of going back, it couldn't have happened, it didn't happen, but would they have survived? Would religion, would politics, would philosophy, would education have anything resembling the authority, the power it has now, if it could all be described just like in a couple of words? You just don't make me. You understand? If somebody asks you, somebody came from another planet and said, "What is this thing I hear religion?" or "What is morality? What is art?" Now, if you were trying to be a sincere ambassador for our good planet and humanity and all of our great progress, you could not describe any of those in the same kind of sense that if they said, what is a rutabaga? You could tell them. One or two words. Well, you could just say something to eat. So, if they understood enough to even ask you what it was, they would have, we've got to assume, some knowledge of the language. You say it's food. Huh. What's you going to say? Well, what's a cabbage? That's food too. If you get past that which would be closer, just almost right on the money, of a survival observation, survival speech, past that, what are you going to say? Why, I ask you, that something is more a part of civilization, sophisticated aspects, educated, the arts, politics, why are they so subject to metaphorical rhapsodizing, extended descriptions then? Why is it that even the educated in a field, in philosophy, in physics, in theology, in the arts, why is it that those who are considered to be experts will even freely admit, hey, I'm not sure that my field, I'm not sure that art in general, I'm not sure that even civilization is subject to a simple definition? Well, hit me with a chemist. It then turns into, although it's not often called this, I admit, but it turns into metaphorical speech. Science is metaphorical. They can say otherwise. I understand the position. I'm not going to get into it's whether you can see it or not. All right, I'll tell you how close they get. I guess when I say science, I'm talking about now that appears to be, wait a minute, we're not philosophers, we're not poets. All we are here doing is measuring, trying to take the full measure, trying to understand the laws that run the universe. We're not interested in thinking about it. Leave that to somebody else. We're just trying to investigate it. Just to show that there is, even at a crude level, some awareness of what I was saying. I assume that all of you know that there's a continuing, it's not new, discussion and debate as to every now and then a voice will pop up. Not enough to hurt anybody real bad, just kind of pops up and they drive him back down. But some respected scientists will say, sometimes I wonder, are we actually discovering laws that run the universe, or are we discovering our observations? Are we making up laws as we go along, and they fit, and two or three other scientists, maybe for a brief second, a cocktail party go, woo, that's heavy, man. And then it's gone. Science, natural science, physical science is still metaphor. Even though they'll say that they're talking about something as physical as the planet, as gravity. Whoa, boy, hey, we're talking serious. As the movements of the heavens. We're not talking art, we're talking science, right? You either hear it or you don't, we'll go on. It all becomes, if it's non-survivable, the more non-survival it is, the more it tends to the metaphorical. Because there is nowhere else to tend to. If you're going to describe the non-existent, well, let's go to another extreme, apparently. Why can't anybody come up with a good definition of God? Won't they just say, well, God's God? Well, that sounds all right, I guess, if you were fully died in some sort of religious context and you were used to it. But if you took somebody else and they say, what is this thing God? You say, well, God is, and then it starts. I mean, go check your local library. I mean, check the size of these holy books that people put out throughout the years. They run into some heavy reading. First, in the Manhattan phone book. And some of them, well, there's been some groups even tried to get past all that, and they say, well, the descriptions of God are just infinite. He's everything you ever imagined, plus one more. Which sounds pretty good. If you're going to describe the non-existent, one word will not do. Two words will not do. No number of words will do. That's why we have intellectual progress. That's why it didn't stop. That's why things continue to apparently change. And if they don't apparently change to one particular observer, then they're apparently getting worse. And if he's educated by God, he'll do his duty and stand up and say, hear, hear. Things are going awry here in religion or science or politics. I think we need a new definition of exactly what integrity in public life is. I think what we need is a new workable definition of exactly what is art. If you're talking about anything that is not directly or through my descriptions, my division into survival and non-survival, if you're dealing with non-survival aspects, you're speaking metaphorically. I don't care if you've got the artistic and allegorical inclinations of a house painter. You're speaking allegorically, you're speaking metaphorically constantly. If you get a grasp on that, you also then have a whole new explanation to yourself as to the inherent, inescapable basis, the real basis, I might add, of the apparent conflicts in reasonable, decent, educated humans' views. Why we have conflicting opinions. Why no one can explain the fact that over here we have, I've met the man, or somebody that says, here he is, he has books out, he's a philosopher. This man is one of the most outstanding, well-respected Hindu thinkers on the subcontinent, or in the world. And over here, grew up 2 doors down, 2 miles away from him, here in the same country, is an equally respected, well-known, intelligent Muslim thinker, writer, apologist. How can these men, how can two educated men, them just being representative of the continuing conflicts that have plagued humanity, how can they be so insane? How can they be at such apparent, intractable loggerheads over, where does God live? How do you spell His name? How many names does He have? Did Muhammad actually fool around on the side? Whatever it is. I'm trying to do that to get you to see that people outside will go either make fun of it, criticize it, or the serious will continue to wring their little bony hands about how can we do this? How can we stay so tied up with theoretical conflicts that will even break out into physical warfare? How can we do that? Back to what appears to be their level, what they're saying is, how can people argue over these aspects of civilization? The obvious example being, how can men kill each other in the name of religion? They can't do otherwise. They're fighting over a non-existent goal. They're fighting over a non-existent prize. They're trying to defend a non-existent position. Did all of the green religious people stand up finally at some point and say, "Aren't you red religious people? You shall not step over this line. You won't take our position." And they're ready to die for it. Why? Because they got no position. That's why it smells funny. That's why ordinary people, without having any great conclusion upon which to draw, find, I'm using my terms now, but you know what I mean, they find aggression, conflict over non-survival aspects to smell extremely weird, as opposed to a good survival. Well, the shorthand is like people will say, well, I can understand a guy that will go in if his family was starving. Somebody lived in Sarajevo now, and if a 7-Eleven store did get back open, and a guy, his family's starving, he goes in and steals a loaf of bread. And they catch him. I can understand. I don't approve of it. We should not steal. We just should not. I'm not religious. He just says we should not steal. Civilization cannot stand up under such an onslaught and such a disrespect for private property. You understand what I'm saying? People say, well, I can sort of understand that. I don't like it, but, okay. But they know that it does not smell the same, even from afar. Just turn on your little TV set and see the little electrons on that tube, and you see these little kids in Northern Ireland throwing rocks and making obscene signs and foaming at the mouth at these other little kids dressed up, teenagers, and you find, well, one of them's Protestant and one of them Catholic. Maybe they even try to grab one of the kids and say, well, what is it? What is the deep division? I mean, you're both as a part of the Christian church. What is the great division between the Protestants and the Catholics? And the kid goes, the what? Oh, well, you catch the drift. He might know the names, but they say, well, what is, when you get to the heart of the actual the theological divisions between your two groups, what is it? Do you follow? And it smells funny. Now, he could have had an answer, but I was trying to give you two different ways to look at it. He could mouth something, and it'd be just as insane. But I was giving you a cruder insanity kind of thing. And he goes, what's theological? They're just Catholics. I don't like them. Why are you always attacking them? Hey, it's our job. It's our hobby. It's my way of life. The point is, if you try to get somebody to describe, why are you having these civilized conflicts? Or why are you having these conflicts amidst the 21st century trappings of civilization? How can you lapse back into such crude, feral, uncivilized behavior? How can you be fighting over concepts, theories? What else are you going to do with them? They don't exist. You can't insult me. I mean, you can insult me personally. You can say that I'm fat and ugly. But hey, don't be talking about my religion. God damn it. You want to fight? Think about it. That's common. It's common individually, and it's common in large groups of people. Yeah, you can talk about the size of our nose and the way we smell, but don't you talk about our religion. Don't you talk about our politics. What do you mean laughing at our stone duck? It's a centerpiece of our cultural museum. once you realize that all human speech above the non-survival is in some form mystical and tends to the metaphorical, then all of the questions about, well, when's life going to straighten out and everybody finally, I don't care what, but finally everybody becomes a Jew or a Catholic or a Protestant or a Hindu or an Italian, you know, and cut out all this other bullshit so we can get down to some serious business. You mean such as everyone preparing your own grave and rolling yourself up and crawling on the ground? That's what would happen. Well, that's what would happen up here. That'd be the end of this. Trying to get into some of the plain talk, one way that you can tell a place is truly civilized, and the word truly is underlined, if you'd like to make note of that. I know I would. Where metaphors and allegories are taken as superior to plain talk. To say a place is truly civilized, I'm sort of pushing it, but I wanted you to see how it goes. From one view, if it was just us talking, it's of no consequence. But if it was an individual talking who was trying to do something on his own, just for a passing picturization, I could have changed this and say, you can tell the place is truly civilized, perhaps too civilized. That's just between us. When metaphors and allegories are taken to be superior to plain talk. I just got through trying to point out to you that in one quite real operative sense, there is no non-survival talk. There is no civilized talk that is not to some degree metaphorical and allegorical. But also the place is really civilized. So in other words, as soon as Ken and Barbie got kicked out, as soon as man became civilized and began talking, his speech became, as soon as it was not tied directly to survival, it became allegorical, mystical, because it was describing that which, comparably speaking, was non-existent, non-required. Then can you see that to turn it into a comparative, a place would be civilized that could talk, where the people talked. If they're talking, they're already talking metaphorically, allegorically, tending toward the mystical in all of its forms. But then to say, all right, then if we're going to compare and say the people down here are even more civilized down the road here. To be more civilized is they would then, of course, have terms for metaphor and allegory and believe that there was a difference. That there are real things we talk about, but then we can talk about them in an expanded manner, in a way that is more revealing. In the true sense, and when I say mystical and etc., I said it had nothing to do with religion, but it's like I guess the real definition of poetic is when the words actually intend to convey more of the author's feelings and insights than the literal words convey. That's what you mean when you say that something's poetic, is that it means more, and you just feel it. That, you know, poor old man rolling over in his grave, I guess now with Madison Avenue all over him, but, you know, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all of the difference. And if you're civilized just in any ordinary sense, you just immediately know, well, he's not just writing about one day he was walking out in the woods and there was two roads split, and he went down, one that looked like people hadn't walked on a lot, and boy, it was, I don't know, it just made all the difference. You just know he's being poetic. He means more than those words literally mean. That would be, in a comparative discussion, that would be a place truly civilized, more civilized than the first one. The first one is already speaking in metaphors and allegories if they're speaking above the survival level. So they're doing it. A little more civilized, they have words for it. And of course, as soon as they have words for it, the words, based upon binary comparison, the words themselves prove, wait a minute, there are things as they are, real things, and then there are poetic ways to describe them. You understand? You're getting more civilized. That is, you're getting one step further away from describing that which doesn't exist. Because it's one thing, understand, back to the first group, it's one thing for crude, uncivilized people to talk about things that do not exist. Like find some old drunken plumber down in Arkansas, and he says, yes, at night, sometimes, especially when I drink that rot gut, when I can't afford the good stuff, the spirit of my dead grandmother gets out in the backyard and I see her kind of waltzing around. You think, boy, people believe that. The crude people in the world, yeah, but the group down the street, those who are more civilized, everybody in that city, they hear about this. Everybody in this other civilized group, they say, they hear this, what I just pointed out, and so they hold a quick vote. Do any of us here believe that the spirit of the dead come back? And they all go, no. Hold your hands if you don't believe it. So they all hold their hand, and they look at me and say, see, we're more civilized. Right. Is anyone here religious? Does anyone believe in politics? Does anyone believe in morality? Does anyone believe that civilization is a good thing? Does anybody believe that it's good to be educated enough so that you don't believe that spirits come back of your dead relatives and dance in the backyard? Oh, yes. Then a few of them might start saying, if they took this as being an attack, as inspecific, as doubtful as it is to them, like, what's he up to? Then somebody would say, wait a minute. Now, I can understand if somebody's referring to spirits and the dead and the ancestors in the past. If you're speaking poetically, now we're not talking about those people up the street that believe spirits actually come to their backyard and dance. But if you, now they're, taking up with this. They say, now poetically, there could be some quite useful validity. There could be, in fact, a metaphorical message of some kind if we begin to talk about spirits and ancestors, but we're doing it poetically. We're doing it metaphorically. Don't you see? Yes, I see. So you understand? They have removed themselves one step away from talking about the non-existent. My drunk plumber in Arkansas that believes they see spirits at night in his backyard, that doesn't exist. We all know that. So we move down the road to the group that's more civilized. They have to remove themselves at least another step to deny, oh no, none of us believe that spirits of our ancestors dance in the backyard. You understand? That's progress. Except for this. Now they have taken the non-existent and they've had to put another coat of talc on top of it. They have to deny that it exists. If you know how to think, any public denial is highly suspect. I don't care what it is. Anytime you get anybody who will stand up publicly and deny something, everyone in here who beats their wife, well, I shouldn't ask, but knowing statistics as I do, in a crowd this size, there's at least 2 people who mistreat their mate. And somebody goes, well, wait a minute, I don't, and I won't say that now. Everybody knows, in a crowd this size, there's probably at least 3 people that have a serious drug problem. And suddenly several people, hey, don't look at me over here. Everybody understands there's something a little funny. Not just that, there's something funny. There's something suspect about any public denial. But for one thing, it's metaphorical. What it is they're denying, they're not denying that. You know what they're denying? No, I'm not caught up in the imaginary. Try it one more time. Remember our first group, the guy that believes, him and all of his ilk up in this first group of civilized people, they can talk. But they worship ancestors. They believe that spirits live in trees or come down and mistreat them if they don't leave out food. Real uncivilized, except they can talk about it. And so you're part of a more civilized group. And you leave and you go back down the road, up the road to a place that's more civilized. I mean, it's obvious from looking at it. And I'm walking along with you and I say, you guys, I assume you consider yourselves more civilized than those. Oh, well, certainly. You saw what the guy. So you don't go along with that dead ancestors, the spirits. Jesus, no. Wait a minute. In fact, don't take my word for it. And he wants to take you into town and get some vocal support for his denial. He won't say even it'll be written on buildings and books, but there will be a public denial that they believe in stuff like that. What I think you missed was I was hoping a little useful information, a way to use it. The first group, they believe in something that doesn't exist. I made a hard example, not civilization, dead people showing up, spirits. They believe in something non-existent. Right, the next stage of being civilized is to deny you believe in that. As always, there's an explanation never seen, because from any ordinary view, you can say, well, that's progress. Yes, it is. Except if you look at it another way, you think, well, Jesus, they're dumber than the first group. I mean, if you know anything, why the hell are you going to bother to deny it? No, I don't believe in dead spirits or spirits coming back from the dead. Jesus, no. Now, wait a minute. Don't walk off. I want to tell you the truth. Now, you got us wrong. No, wait a minute. There used to be some people lived here, and they were religious, I think, a long time before us. Well, you moved here? No. Wait a minute. No. You understand? That is also part of civilization. It's not just the claims of all of the great human, the singularly human and civilized things in which you believe, arts, religion, science, but also an equal amount of denials. No, we no longer believe in superstition. No, we no longer believe that the universe is tied to no more than the general mechanical laws of physics as laid down by Newton et al. Now, the day of particle physics and quantum physics are upon us. You guys spent at least half your time making public denials. They come out in other forms, but that's what it amounts to, is a public denial. Oh, no. Why is that necessary? If it was back to survival, what if a man one time, or a group of people, one time, instead of sweet potatoes, decided, I know what, let's try this weekend. Why don't we all eat some old toothbrushes and razor blades? So a group of guys try it, right? Other than the fact, assuming they survive it, they won't try it again. But are they going to be inclined to get out and publicly denounce this and say, listen, whatever you people do, don't ever, when you're hungry, don't ever, even on the weekend, don't ever try and eat razor blades and old toothbrushes. Now, you can laugh and think, well, it'd make them look bad. It is deeper than that. It's more basic. It's more right in your face than that. Is people do not deny any more than, as I point out, you do not have advertisements. You don't even have public service announcements encouraging you in areas and pursuits of survival. You don't have public service announcements encouraging people, eat some food. Have sex with somebody of your same species. If you're extremely tired, sleep. And then get up when you get tired. You do not have to be encouraged in matters of survival. You've got to be encouraged in matters post-survival. You've got to be sold on. That's what advertising. Not just public service. You don't advertise food generically. You got to advertise your brand of food and try and get people to eat that brand. Because in a sense it does not exist. It's post-survival. You don't have to have post-Raisin Bran. Just came to mind. You don't even have to have packaged cereal. What you got to have is food. So in a sense, compared to food, which would be survival, on which you do not have to be sold, upon which there is nothing to proclaim. You don't see people out in the streets marching in favor of food, and across the street those going, no food here. No. You see it with closer it gets to, well. You got a tape change? Let me quit. I'm going to start doing an hour at a time. We'll get back to plain talk maybe next time, or maybe I'll forget about it. Plain talk. That's all.